There is a question that quietly follows people long after a relationship has ended, though few ever say it aloud. It isn't why did they leave? It isn't even did they ever love me? The question that lingers is far more unsettling. When did my love stop feeling like something precious? Because almost no one remembers the exact moment. There is no single conversation that explains it, no unmistakable scene where affection suddenly becomes worthless. Instead, it feels as though something invisible. That realization is what haunts people, not the ending itself, but the discovery that something they believed had immeasurable value could quietly become ordinary without either of them noticing. Most endings don't begin with cruelty. They begin with comfort. At first, comfort feels like success. The uncertainty disappears, the fear of losing each other fades, and life settles into routines that promise stability. That safety feels like the reward everyone hopes for. Yet comfort has a strange effect on perception. The extraordinary slowly becomes expected. What once felt unforgettable becomes part of the landscape, noticed less with every passing day. This isn't because people deliberately decide to stop appreciating one another. Human attention naturally drifts away from what has become familiar. The first sunrise after a storm can leave you speechless, but if you watch the same sunrise every morning, your mind would eventually stop reaching for words. Familiar. In the beginning, every small gesture feels meaningful because it carries uncertainty. A smile feels like reassurance. A conversation feels like discovery. A simple goodbye feels heavy because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. But as time passes, certainty replaces curiosity. The gestures remain, yet the emotional response weakens, not because the gestures have become smaller, but because the mind has become accustomed to receiving them. What once felt extraordinary now feels inevitable. The love itself may not have changed, but the way it is experienced begins to shift so gradually that neither person realizes it is happening. That slow shift is one of the hardest experiences to describe because it rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Friends may still see two people laughing together. Family may still believe everything is fine. Even the couple themselves may insist nothing has changed. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle transformation has begun. Conversations lose the excitement of discovery because there is less curiosity. Shared moments become predictable. Silence no longer feels peaceful because it is no longer filled with anticipation. It is simply another part of the routine. Nothing appears broken, yet something essential is becoming less visible. The mind has an extraordinary ability to adapt. It protects us by turning repeated experiences into background noise so we can focus on new information. Without that ability, every ordinary moment would overwhelm us. But this remarkable feature comes with an unexpected cost. It can also make us overlook the people who have become woven into our daily lives. We stop noticing not because they matter less, but because they have become part of what feels permanent. The danger is that permanence is often mistaken for certainty, and certainty can quietly dull appreciation if it is left unattended. That is why people are often shocked when they look back at photographs from years earlier. They don't simply miss the person they once loved. They miss the version of themselves that still noticed everything. They remember how one glance could brighten an entire day, how ordinary conversations felt endlessly interesting, how simply being together seemed enough. Looking back, they wonder where that feeling disappeared. The painful truth is that it rarely disappears all at once. It is gradually buried beneath repetition until memory becomes the only place where its intensity survives. Memory itself plays a strange role in this story. It edits. It simplifies. It convinces us that there must have been a turning point because dramatic explanations are easier to understand than slow ones. We search for the argument that ruined everything, the mistake that changed the relationship forever, the day everything fell apart. Yet life often resists such clean narratives. Relationships are usually shaped by hundreds of unnoticed moments rather than one unforgettable event. Distance accumulates quietly, almost politely, until it finally becomes impossible to ignore. There is also another illusion that makes this process even more confusing. We often believe that love is measured by how intensely it is felt. But intensity is not constant. No emotion remains at its highest point forever. The excitement that accompanies something new naturally settles over time. That settling does not necessarily mean love has become weaker. Sometimes it simply means the relationship has moved into a different season. The problem begins when people mistake the absence of constant intensity for the absence of value. They start chasing feelings they once experienced instead of recognizing the quieter forms that love can take. Yet quiet love has its own vulnerability. Because it asks for less attention, it is easier to overlook. Grand gestures are memorable because they interrupt routine. Quiet loyalty, patient listening, shared responsibilities, and daily kindness often disappear into routine because they do not demand applause. Ironically, these are the very things that sustain relationships over years, yet they are also the easiest to stop seeing. Human attention is drawn toward change, while consistency slowly becomes invisible. Sometimes this invisibility creates a painful misunderstanding. One person may continue loving with the same sincerity they always had, while the other no longer experiences those expressions with the same emotional impact. Neither person is necessarily dishonest. They are simply living through different perceptions of the same reality. One believes nothing has changed because the effort remains. The other believes everything has changed because the feeling no longer arrives with the same force. They begin speaking different emotional languages without realizing the translation has been lost. This is why regret so often arrives late. Appreciation frequently returns only after absence changes perception again. When routines disappear, the mind suddenly notices everything it had filtered out. The empty chair at dinner, the familiar laugh that no longer fills the room, the habits that once seemed ordinary, each detail returns with startling clarity. What felt invisible while it was present becomes painfully obvious once it is gone. Loss has a remarkable way of restoring attention. But even then, memory can be deceptive. It tends to preserve highlights while softening frustrations. We remember warmth more vividly than boredom, closeness more vividly than routine. This selective remembering can create the illusion that the relationship was perfect until it ended. In reality, every long relationship contains ordinary days, misunderstandings, repeated conversations, and moments of emotional fatigue. Those moments are not evidence that love failed. They are evidence that love existed within real life rather than within fantasy. Perhaps that is one of the greatest misunderstandings people carry. They imagine love loses its value because someone stopped caring. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes people genuinely drift apart or choose different paths. But in many cases, the greater danger is not hatred or betrayal. It is simple inattention. Not malicious neglect, but the ordinary human tendency to stop seeing what has become familiar. The tragedy lies in how quietly this can unfold, without either person intending for it to happen. And maybe that is why so many people struggle to explain their heartbreak. They cannot point to one unforgettable betrayal because there wasn't one. Instead, they describe a feeling of slowly becoming less visible inside someone else's life. Nothing dramatic changed overnight. They simply woke up one day and realized the warmth that once surrounded them had faded into habit. That realization is difficult to argue against because it isn't built from facts alone. It is built from thousands of subtle emotional impressions collected over months and years. The hardest part is that by the time someone recognizes this feeling, both people are often carrying different versions of the same history. One remembers all the effort that was given. The other remembers all the moments they felt unseen. Neither memory is necessarily false. They simply illuminate different parts of the same story. Love is experienced through perception as much as through action, and perception is constantly shaped by expectation, emotion, stress, and time. So perhaps the most haunting truth is not that love suddenly loses its value. It is that value is something human beings must continually notice. Left unnoticed, even extraordinary things begin to blend into the background. Not because they have become ordinary, but because our attention has quietly moved elsewhere. We assume what remains will always remain, until one day it doesn't. Long after the relationship ends, people often find themselves searching for the exact moment everything changed. They replay memories, hoping one scene will explain the entire story. Yet the answer rarely hides inside one conversation. It lives inside countless ordinary days that seemed too small to matter at the time. Those days quietly shaped everything. And perhaps that is why the ending feels so unsettling. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality about memory, attention, and love itself. We expect precious things to disappear dramatically. Instead, they often fade beneath the weight of familiarity until their absence is louder than their presence ever was. By the time we finally understand what was slipping away, we are no longer watching it happen. We are only remembering that, once upon a time, it still felt priceless.